Hello, everybody. It's Jody Franklin, and I'm so thrilled today to have Tracy Harrison on board with us. Tracy, as many of you know, is the founder and lead educator for the School of Applied Functional Medicine. And today she's going to talk about critical GI issues that most practitioners miss. So this is not your run-of-the-mill gut education that she's going to go into today. We're going to talk about nitty-gritty details about H pylori, acid reflux, and how that affects other parts of your body, what other disease processes this can contribute to. I'm going to talk about H pylori, GERD, all kinds of dysfunction today and what it can lead to. So I can't wait to have her on board. But for those of you who don't know Tracy, she is so passionate about transforming healthcare. And I am a graduate of the School of Applied Functional Medicine. I'm a teaching consultant for the School of Applied Functional Medicine. And I cannot believe what I am capable of in terms of helping the clients that come to me, overcoming the most deeply rooted disease symptoms that they've had for years and years and not been able to do anything with. And Tracy teaches you, I know she doesn't want that, she doesn't like it when I gloat here, but she really teaches you how to get to the root causes, go upstream, figure things out. Don't just replace a drug with a supplement, but really learn how to reverse the disease process and be confident and competent for everything that comes your way. And I just feel like I'm so blessed to have gone through this program. And I think you're all going to be blown away if you haven't heard of Tracy before in this talk she's going to do today. She's a scientist by background. She's a systems engineer by background, and she has 3 degrees from MIT. I think she eats research papers for breakfast every morning. She's absolutely brilliant. And the nice thing that she's doing today for all of you, she's going to announce this a little later, but I'll let Terry go ahead and put it in the comments here. She's going to give you a chance to win one of 5 free advanced half-day workshops, which give you 5 CME credits too. So make sure to register for that as well. And she'll put that on the Facebook here and as well as in the chat, which is very, very generous. But Tracy, thank you so much for coming here today. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. I've got my pen ready. I'm going to take a ton of notes. Always learning.
All right. Awesome. Jody, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate that. But let's get going with this session, because as I mentioned earlier here on Zoom, for the folks on Facebook, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day in order to advance your knowledge. Very grateful for that always. I know we're really quite busy, but if you have questions, please post them, because the thing I most want to do today is to be of service, to really add some clinical pearls, some things you can go and use right away in order to support your practice.
For some reason, I'm hearing that I'm not live in Facebook. Can you confirm that, Tracy? I don't know not Tracy, Terry. She says we're not live in the group, and I'm not sure why. So give me just a second to figure this out.
I think that might have been from before. Zoom is saying we're live.
Oh, okay, good.
All right, we're good. No worries. Nothing like triple checking is important. All right. So again, I have some slides here that I want to share, but I am so happy as always to go off script, into the weeds, into the details that matter most to you. So please do ask your questions. I am happy. And Jody, Terry, if either of you want to interrupt me in order to interject some questions, feel free.
I just want to mention also, if any of you want a copy of the slides, if you go ahead and go to the announcements in this group and register for this, if you haven't done that, if you're watching on Facebook now, register for this event, and we will send you a copy of the slides as well. So any of you are on Zoom now, you're all set. You'll get a copy.
Yeah, and please do, because I'm going to give you some references in the footers of the slide pages, so you can follow on some targeted references for further detail. But just to whet the appetite here, as I like to say, get the juices flowing, I think it behooves all of us to remember what a strange and magnificent world the human gastrointestinal tract is. It has a massive downstream functional impact on pretty much every other system in the body. The gut course, disease begins in the gut, is the first clinical course we teach at SAFM, because it forms a foundation we believe that you must have if you are going to keenly and astutely address any other disease dynamic in the body. Because if we overlook the gut and don't eventually address the gut, it's really quite likely that any other disease dynamic, whether it's asthma or Alzheimer's or type 2 diabetes, it is going to recur, or it may not fully be able to be resolved because of gut mediated imbalances. But I think there are a few aspects that we need to keep in mind about the gut. And I'm not going to read any of these slides thoroughly. I know you can do that, but I want to draw your attention to this beautiful picture. This is a famous forest tunnel in Europe. But so often I find we think about the gut, we like to use simple analogies, but we often use analogies that are not appropriate. Like the gut is a hose or a tube or a pipe. And we lose sight of just how much the gut is a garden, and why we must absolutely treat it, nurture it, tend to it, weed it. But we have to treat it carefully because there's a planetary level population and diversity of microbes in the gut that is regulating pretty much every system in the human body. I like to say, we think our brain is in charge, our DNA is in, our cellular DNA is in charge. The nucleus is in charge. No, it's not. The microbiome is in charge. And I think we're increasingly learning that, and they will take care of us to the extent that we take care of them. And so much of whether it's our immune system or our digestive system or our nervous system behavior, how our bodies are informed about the status of our world and whether or not we need to be in a sympathetic nervous system mode that promotes fighting, flighting, and hiding, or whether we need to be in a parasympathetic nervous system mode, which promotes resting, digesting, healing, making babies. These things, we don't so much tell our nervous system what to do as our nervous system is being formed via its own pathways about the true status of our world. And I'm going to talk a bit today about stress, because I find something that our patients can wrestle with in a big way is taking serious action about their stress. And it's perhaps the most overlooked clinical intervention in terms of helping people to have sustainable improvements in gut health. There is no such thing as having a healthy gut and healthy gut function while you're primarily living in a sympathetic nervous system mode. It's just not possible. We're not actually designed that way. And so often patients are looking for the pill, the quick fix, the intervention that's going to make it so they can keep being stressed out because it's part of their identity. And helping people to take actual step-by-step change in the face of stress in order to change their experience in the face of that stress is a critical clinical skill, regardless of your modality. But the picture of the garden is really important because I think one of the biggest missteps that an awful lot of practitioners make these days is over treating the gut with antimicrobials. It's a big problem in the world of functional medicine right now. We love comprehensive stool tests, right? The geekier, the better, the more information, the better. We're looking for something to kill. We're looking for something to change in terms of population. Even when we're speaking about commensal microbial species, things like Candida albicans or Helicobacter pylori should not be treated as novel pathogens that need to be completely wiped out from the face of the gut. That actually would be to our detriment. These are important commensals that humans have been thriving with from our very beginnings. And while we must address opportunistic overgrowths of some of these commensal species, our aim should be to tame the overgrowth in order to keep it from having notable downstream effects, but to simply bring it back into commensal balance. And then most importantly, change the terrain. I believe we need to be focusing way, way more on the terrain of the garden that allows this incredibly rich biodiversity to thrive, rather than incisive zapping of individual species, which, if you've been doing functional medicine for a while, you know, largely creates the revolving door stool test. Do a stool test, treat it, someone feels better. 6 months later, they come back. Oh, do another stool test, treat that one too. And on and on and on and on, which, okay, it brings them back to your practice. It keeps them using your services. But is that deeply fulfilling to you? It's not for many of us. It's not helping people to have resilient stability of gut health, where a person can be managing their own health under their own autonomy and advisement, because the microbiome is allowed to flourish and be highly diverse and have very small amounts of incredibly pathogenic species that's there for purposes of priming and regulating immune function, but being properly controlled by the oh so powerful human immune system so that it doesn't opportunistically overgrow and get a toehold and promote downstream disease dynamics. And so I want to encourage you to think less about find the potential pathogen and kill it, which, I mean, to be fair, comprehensive stool test and giving course after course of antimicrobials, especially over and over and over again, it can be just as short-sighted as repeated courses of antibiotics for this, upper respiratory infection that some of us are so frustrated with in conventional medicine. We have to similarly avoid the allure of that short-sighted type of strategy. But if we want the microbiome to flourish differently, just like in a garden like this, you have to change the terrain, just like in your lawn. If you have a lot of weeds in your lawn, you keep having to kill them or pull them all up. It's logical for them to come back unless you change the soil, change the environment, change the milieu of the garden in which these species are being allowed, actively being encouraged actually, to overgrow. The other piece that I want to highlight for a moment that I think our attention is being more and more drawn to, that we've been teaching for a long time now here at SAFM, is the criticality of vagal transmission and the importance of afferent transmission, which is the predominant activity of the vagus nerve, informing the brain and as a result, the systemic body about the status of our world based on what is happening in the gut. And I'm going to talk more about that because when there are challenges with regard to vagal transmission, pretty much everything that happens in the entire torso of human physiology is going to suffer. But because this is a master's class, I'm not going to give you a lot of overview information. We all know that systemic disease often begins in the gut and frequently from seemingly humble beginnings. And you can have digestive insufficiency, such as hypochlorhydria, which can lead to suboptimal or insufficient levels of a given nutrient, which then directly contribute to some downstream functional imbalance. Because as much as we need calories, we need macronutrients as metabolic fuel in our mitochondria to generate ATP. All human biochemistry runs on micronutrition, which is incredibly dependent on the gut. And we know that a lot of these disease dynamics are actually synergistic, where we may have, for example, suboptimal stomach acid, which impairs our ability to denature proteins and then use digestive enzymes to optimally cleave minerals from their polypeptide chains where they're conjugated. And then that suboptimal minerals, such as magnesium, leads to disease dynamics. But in some cases, they're disease dynamics that come back and exacerbate gut dysfunction, such as suboptimal magnesium is a common culprit with regard to constipation or other dysmotility that can promote poor brush border function in the intestines and contribute to dysbiosis in the smaller, large intestines that can create wear and tear, oxidative wear and tear on the intestinal lining that promotes malabsorption of nutrients. One thing I want all of you to make sure you add to your toolbox is the widespread incidence of exocrine pancreatic insufficiency in your patients who have type 2 diabetes or any type of diabetes. Actually, it's almost as prominent in type 1 diabetes as in type 2, even though obviously the etiology of those disease dynamics is different. But when the pancreas is being overtly impaired and not able to provide endocrine sufficiency with insulin, it shouldn't surprise us from an anatomical impairment viewpoint that the pancreas also struggles to put out sufficient digestive enzymes in order to affect optimal digestion. And so be sure to look for pancreatic insufficiency in your patients and clients with any stage: full-fledged type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, pre-pre, all of these names we give to shades of gray along a spectrum of metabolic dysfunction. But it is a common way in which metabolic disease can precipitate gastrointestinal disease and vice versa. But let's get to some richer concepts, because I want to make sure you take away some pearls today that go beyond the education that you've already had with regard to functional gastroenterology. There are a lot of things that functional medicine gets right today in the world of the GI tract, digestion, how disease begins in the gut, right? We understand that food quality matters. Digestion is something you cannot take for granted. You are what you eat, as a catchphrase, is woefully oversimplified. We are what we eat, digest, absorb, convert to final forms, and get past the cell membrane, which is a much higher hurdle than just putting the food in your mouth and chewing up and swallowing it. Many, many, many people in our practices have one or more types of maldigestion. Yes, we need to be aware of overgrowths. Yes, opportunistic and especially commensal overgrowths and imbalances are incredibly common, whether it's SIBO or SIFO or EMO, right? These are incredibly common, but as I said before, we often go overboard in our giddy excitement to find something to treat in the world of antimicrobials. We finally are vindicated today, those of us who've been talking about enhanced intestinal permeability for a decade or more. It is no longer quackery. Now it's everywhere in published medical research. Leaky gut is a real thing. But also it's not universal. Not everyone who is struggling has enhanced intestinal permeability. So often we identify things in the functional medicine world and we start to see them everywhere. I did a webinar for our students several years ago, kind of going through the historical annals of the thing of the day in the world of functional medicine, right? Used to be everyone had candida overgrowth. Oh my gosh, everyone has it, right? And then everyone has mercury toxicity. And then everyone has adrenal exhaustion, right? And then everyone has Lyme, everyone has mold. And we go through these fads, and so much of ongoing clinical prowess is really about being able to keep beginner's mind and being able to learn these things and add them to your toolbox, but exercise scientific restraint and jumping to the conclusion, oh my gosh, everyone has H. pylori overgrowth. No, they don't. No, they don't. There's nothing that everyone has. Absolutely nothing. And true resilient capability through the functional lens depends on our ability to keep beginner's mind and to have enough of the right kind of education to not be dependent on handy dandy charts for protocols, but to be able with ease to customize a set of interventions for the unique individual sitting right in front of you. And that is accessible. That is not impossible. It is fully accessible.
Tracy, there's a question here about
Sure.
candida specifically while you're on that topic.
Yeah.
Lee wants to know, how would you approach someone who showed a high red level reaction of candida in a food sensitivity test? Is this just an indication of gut overgrowth or systemic since it's a serum test?
That's a great question. It could be either, it could be neither. So part of the challenge of measuring antibody, you're talking about IgG antibodies, I'm almost certain, because
I think
that's the
so.
typical type of food sensitivity test. And given there is commensal candida in the gut, we're going to constantly have then that priming presence of the species that will mean there's some amount of IgG, and IgG antibodies are persistent. And so a person could have had an overgrowth of candida in the body, and the overgrowth may be resolved, but the IgG antibody level is still coming down from where it was before. So the marker you're speaking of is not diagnostic at all. It's a red flag that certainly deserves your investigation. Sometimes people have, sometimes women who have a disrupted microbiome, often because of pH in their vaginal tract, for example, struggle with cyclical yeast infections, maybe as part of their menstrual cycles. People who take recurrent antibiotics, maybe prophylactically, maybe because they've had a joint replacement or they have an antibiotic happy primary care provider. They may get episodic candida overgrowths that their immune system resolves handily, but it's going to keep their IgG antibody level pumped. And you're going to see that in the data. So that's not diagnostic. It is just a red flag. And it is not diagnostic of enhanced intestinal permeability, because as you point out, the candida could be somewhere else. But it is a red flag that deserves some investigation. I think we need to look more and more for any lab marker to be a cue and a clue, not a diagnostic certainty, and look at using multiple puzzle pieces and putting together a more accurate lens of what is happening in a unique body, rather than ever relying on one singular marker to tell us anything. Lab data is not that reliable. It's not that good. There are so many reasons why a marker could be abnormally high or low that are different from the primary diagnostic target that we want it to represent. And so again, an opportunity for a beginner's mind. It is valuable to have it, though, as a red flag, so that you can go and investigate, why is this elevated in this unique person? And certainly it may be persistent opportunistic candida overgrowth in the gut. And again, you can treat that. You can beat it back. What you don't want to do is keep treating it month after month after month. The goal is to beat it back and then treat the terrain in a sustainable way, so that the opportunistic commensal overgrowth is no longer likely, simply because you've changed the environment. So anyway, these are things that functional medicine gets right. And I think we all look at these and go, yeah, Tracy, we get it. We understand. But these were things that were really out there concepts 10 or 15 years ago. But I want to speak about where we need to focus more. These are some concepts we spend a lot of time focusing on at SAFM in terms of taking things to the next level. For example, the mouth is not a separate from the body piece of our anatomy. Sometimes we teach oral health or dentistry, almost like it's a completely separate, A&P science. It's over there to the right. The mouth is the top of the gut. And therefore, if disease begins in the gut, that probably means the root causes of an awful lot of it is in the mouth. And so much can go wrong in the mouth. And we need to be asking them all about oral health in order to understand what is at play. I think we're going to see a lot more, for example, in, how much of the roots of oral infection, how much of the roots of, intestinal infectious dynamics, how much of SIBO actually has its roots in microbial imbalance in the mouth? How much condensation of mercury outgassing from the mouth that's being regularly swallowed is part of what's contributing to immunosuppression in the gut, and especially lower levels of secretory IgA.
Boy, are you preaching to the choir on that one. And one of the things that I think Tracy saved my life with learning about that, in that my autoimmune disease is in full remission after overcoming crazy high levels
Yeah.
of mercury in my system. So yeah, great example.
You had all your amalgams taken out, didn't you,
I
Jody?
did. After going through your program, I
Yeah.
knew that this was a big problem for me. And since, and it's not just a matter of removing it, to your point, you learn how to detoxify from it safely. And I haven't had an autoimmune flare. I've had, I think, one in 6 years, which is just amazing
Wow,
after
awesome.
suffering
I didn't
for
know
over
that.
20 years. Yeah. So
Awesome. So eating hygiene, there is no less sexy topic than chewing, but I could do an entire 2-hour course on why it is so essential and just how few people do it. I mean, Americans are the worst, right? We want to chew it just enough to feel like we can swallow without choking. And then we use some giant bolus of liquid to choke it down to swallow it. And chewing is the only part of digestion that's voluntary. And the entire rest of the complex chain of human digestion has to deal with what we did or didn't do in the mouth. We need to be teaching patients how to chew. Have a bag of walnuts in your office or something else, right? Where you put one in your mouth, they put one in their mouth. Let's practice chewing. What does that actually look like to chew something until it's liquidy? And when you feel the impetus to swallow, how do you move the bolus of food to the side of your mouth so you can swallow the used saliva, just like you would if you had chewing gum in your mouth, and then bring the food back out? More saliva comes in. You keep chewing, the digestion continues. Seems crazy simple. I'm amazed at the number of people who don't know how to chew. Motility. I think this is the most overlooked function in the GI tract. It's everything in terms of regulation of the microbiome and the effect of the migrating motor complex on the mucosal integrity in the GI tract. It's an aspect of hormesis, right? Where we're constantly sweeping and providing low-grade challenge to the mucosal lining, right? 1 or 2 layers in the intestines that's constantly promoting our microbial friends to regenerate, right? More mucus in order to create that beneficial biofilm that houses our precious microbiome. Motility, whether it's stress impairing it or subclinical hypothyroid function that's impairing it, maybe inadequate serotonin levels, right? 90+% of the body's serotonin synthesized in the enteric nervous system in the gut. All sorts of things can contribute to suboptimal serotonin, either synthesis or action in the gut. And, we talk about all of these in our courses, but I want you to have a checklist that you can go through to think about. But I want to dive into a couple of these just to give you a few more pearls that you can take away. And in the world of digestion and absorption, making sure that when you are thinking about all the things that could overtly interfere with digestion and absorption, it's a lengthy list, and I want to make sure all of these are part of your toolbox. But eating hygiene is by far the most often overlooked one. And I get it. It seems almost so simple that it can't quite be scientific. I get it. Totally get it. But as I said before, chewing is perhaps the least imaginable sexy topic, but it is so essential. And I'm going to talk more about acid reflux in just a moment. People can have all sorts of reasons that create an environment that promotes gastroesophageal reflux of acid up through the lower esophageal sphincter into the esophagus. There are multiple possible contributors to that, but a common one is poor eating hygiene, right? Eating quickly, eating while stressed, gulping down huge amounts of liquid. Some of our patients and clients forget to hydrate in between meals. There's nothing wrong with drinking some liquid with your meals, but at least here in the US, you should not be served a meal with a 40-ounce glass of water, especially freezing cold water. Some amount of water promotes digestion, but we can actually dilute our stomach acid to the point where we promote maldigestion, especially if it's super cold, which can also interfere with the natural local motility in the various digestive cavities as food, chyme, moves throughout the GI tract. But we ideally chew food until it's quite liquidy before we swallow. The more you chew carbohydrates, they become broken down and there's more simple sugars in them. They taste better. People can get 5 minutes of really rich satisfaction from one square of chocolate. 5 minutes or 5 seconds. That's not about how much food. That's not about portion size. It's about teaching the self-control of how do we experience food. This is something many practitioners overlook. You could easily record a video that teaches people how to do this and have them practice it at home. It's a really fun thing actually to do in a workshop or a group program. Similarly, slower, relaxed, smaller meals. Most people overeat, in part because they're eating too quickly. We know that we have a few different hormones in the body that regulate hunger. One of the ones that regulates hunger over more of a longer window of time in our general metabolic functioning is leptin. But in the moment associated with a meal, there are other hormones that play more immediate overt roles, and that includes cholecystokinin, which takes about 15 to 20 minutes to respond. It takes more time to respond in a lower fat meal. But if we eat so quickly, people practically inhale their meals. If they eat their entire meal in 10 minutes, they don't feel full yet. So they eat more. By the time the full 20 minutes has passed, now they suddenly feel overfull. They've eaten past the threshold of pleasant satiety, in large part just because they're eating too quickly. This is a huge issue, and teaching people different tools, whether it's putting less food on their fork, putting a bite of food in their mouth, put your fork down, hold your hands to give your hands something to do, practicing chewing many times and then swallowing, and then taking a breath, a nice slow inhale and exhale before you have the next meal. The next bite. Real simple habits can make a very big difference. But people are often looking for simple, easy to follow guidance on how to eat less but still be satisfied. Slowing down is an awesome opportunity for rapid relief in that space. But I want to talk about stress. I use a lot of pictures in our education at SAFM because pictures are easy for practitioners to turn around and use with your patients. Pictures stimulate life connection, personal connection. It helps people to recall. They can quickly look at a lot of pictures and relate to things that apply to them or things that don't. And stress is something that the vast majority of people in our practices like to joke about, like to talk about, like to lament about. I'm amazed. I remain amazed at the number of people who will actually compete with one another about whose life is more stressful. It's almost as though we're looking for how much stress we can tolerate as being a badge of honor, as being a sort of a, I'm a bigger martyr than you because I put up with more shit than you do in my life. I've sat in Starbucks before and listened to women. You think that's bad? Let me tell you how crappy my weekend was. And I had to do this and this. And I haven't done any self-care in 2 weeks. You think that's bad? I can't even remember the last time I did anything for self-care. But neither of them are horrified. It's like a competition. We've got to teach people to treat stress as a primary root cause of disease. This cartoon here, I've joked with the cartoonist about multiple times because I think it well represents our warped attitude about stress. We don't want to relax because we see it as being healthy, or God forbid, just because it's pleasant, that could be something worth striving for. We want to be on the cutting edge of relaxation. We want to be the best at everything, right? We want to have the newest, best, most awesomeness of all things. There's something truly warped about our attitude of going and doing and more and more and going and doing and more and more. And in many of the patients that you're serving, the interventions that you have used are very appropriate scientifically, but we have not made sustainable, resilient inroads in changing a unique individual's stress. Not talking about it, not cataloging it, changing it. And because all healing comes from parasympathetic activation, please write that down. All healing, all, not most, all healing is a parasympathetic response. It is unscientific. It is illogical for a person to think that they can keep going and doing and ruminating about it and going and doing and ruminating about it. That's part of how they identify themselves. It's part of their normal day to day, and expect to have resilient healing from any disease dynamic. It's illogical. And so this is really key in terms of helping people to understand just how much stress is in the way of their healing. And we can talk all day about how stress affects the systemic body. Because when we're in a sympathetic nervous system mode, the body is on purpose, not by accident, but on purpose, down-regulating gastrointestinal digestive secretions and motility, purposefully shifting the endocrine axis in ways that overtly impair fertility, purposefully impairing detoxification, purposefully, in the case of chronic stress, suppressing immune function on purpose. On purpose. This is not because anything in the body is broken. The body is working exactly as it was designed to. And if your body is not sure that you're going to survive today, it doesn't really care whether you're getting enough food for tomorrow. It doesn't really care whether you get enough sleep tonight to feel better tomorrow. It doesn't really care if you get pregnant by the desired target date. It doesn't care. It doesn't understand that your stress is coming from something passive or transient or superficial. It just knows, taking all of the cues and clues from your physiology, it knows that your survival is not assured. And it is purposefully changing all sorts of muscle contractions, neurotransmission, hormone balances, glandular secretions. It's changing all of those things to do one thing: survive till tomorrow. People are really stressed out. They have insomnia. That's not a problem to fix. It's an upstream root cause to adjust. Yes, we can help people with rapid relief for insomnia in the face of stress, but continuing to do that month after month after year, that's not comprehensive functional medicine. It's treating symptoms. Oh, the body naturally sleeps lightly and for very short periods of time when it's not sure of our survival. Because if we were able to be super stressed and then have this deep restorative sleep, humans would have died out a long time ago, because whatever we are running from would have attacked us in the middle of the night while we were sleeping soundly. These are truths that we have to teach people. And the vagus nerve plays a massive role in enacting our nervous system state. You certainly can read all of this as you wish. A lot of practitioners, I find, don't have deep enough knowledge about the impact of the vagus nerve on immune function, and how much the vagus nerve, yes, a nerve, is involved in modulating immune function in response to our stress level. The article I've referenced down here at the bottom is one I highly recommend you not just skim, but read in its entirety. It's really fascinating and brings home not just things that we may naturally think of, like, oh, vagal transmission affects speaking, breathing, the heart beating, the digestion, the motility, right? Sexual function, all of these things, but a huge impact actually on immune balance, especially the balance between pro-inflammatory T helper cell activity and T regulatory cell activity, which helps to create immune balance, especially key in these COVID days. But people need to be taught that there is a massive scientific foundation of the negative effects of stress just even on the gut alone. And then we could massively expand this with exponentially higher levels of well demonstrated physiological impairment that happens in the face of stress. But this is something we have to bring credence to clinically so that people can have our patients can have a serious aha around, oh, so you mean as long as I'm continuing to be stressed, my IBS is going to keep coming back. Yes, it is, but not for loosey-goosey nebulous reasons, for very specific physiological reasons that we need to promote the credibility of in our practice through patient education, because otherwise stress becomes too much of a toss away thing. Well, this is not the right time for me to not be stressed, so I'm just going to take more supplements, right? I'm looking for more quick fixes. And I believe comprehensive functional medicine strives for a higher outcome than that, a higher goal than that. And when people can really get galvanized and passionate about the effects of stress and truly prioritizing various mindfulness activities, true parasympathetic activating activities, it changes their life. And you can teach them what does that. This is a fabulous article here on the impact of various mindfulness activities and complementary and alternative medical interventions for changing vagal behavior, for changing parasympathetic activation. But we have to teach people the power of these things. Again, they sound too simple to be scientifically credible, to be as physiological intent as they are. But simple things like mindfulness breaks, gratitude journaling. Many people cannot access meditation because they're too stressed. So please don't have that be the first thing you recommend. I think that's really counterproductive. Gratitude journaling for 5 to 10 minutes at most, either first thing in the morning or last thing at night, that's accessible to almost everyone. And teach them that gratitude journaling is not a superficial, oh, I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful for my spouse, I'm grateful for my health, blah, blah, blah bullshit. That doesn't help most people because it doesn't activate an emotion. Gratitude journaling has to activate a feel-good emotion in order to trigger parasympathetic response. Encourage people to write down that special 5 minutes when I walked in and caught my daughter singing to herself with the doll I just gave her for her birthday and her sweet voice and the sunlight coming in the window. That is gratitude. That brings an emotion. It brings a feeling that people can reference and go back and look at again and remember how much their experience of stress is about what they choose to focus on. Life is always going to have stressors. What do we choose to focus on? And by far, for the average person, the largest source of stress in their life is the voice in their head. And we have to teach them to see that and honor that as being the palpable influence. You don't hide from your body the status of your stress. You're not going to fake out your own nervous system about the status of your world. It's listening to your thoughts and knows exactly how stressed you are. And no matter how much happy-go-lucky language we use with our voice, if in our minds we're constantly fearful, criticizing, ruminating, disaster prognosticating, no amount of meditating is going to convince your nervous system mode that it doesn't need to fight, flight, and hide. So we have to take ownership for the voice in our head and begin to make choices that can begin to shift those thoughts, right? Teaching people when you come upon that thought to catch yourself, choose a different thought, choose a different thought, and to develop that muscle and exercise it and make it stronger, just like any other habit. But let's talk for a moment about stomach acid. Definitely want to get to this today because bile and the gallbladder have gone through their stage of functional medicine celebrity. And I do think that we should help as many patients as possible to keep their gallbladder because, my goodness, bile is responsible for so much more in the GI tract than just fat and fat-soluble vitamin digestion. but stomach acid, another lowly digestive substance that we must assess and consider where are individuals experiencing hypochlorhydria or insufficiency of stomach acid and all of the downstream dynamics that it can cause. And I've given you a whole bunch of information on this slide that you can reference. But if we even just consider the massive number of people in our practices who are using proton pump inhibitor or H2 receptor blocker medications as a relief, and it is just a relief because it's not addressing the root cause at all, but relief for acid reflux, we need to remember that while they're getting relief from the acid reflux, they are purposefully breaking their digestion. It is purposeful, dramatic impairment on digestion. And all sorts of downstream issues, whether it's delayed gastric emptying, which actually affects insulin response, or maldigestion of proteins that can impair mineral digestion and absorption. We can have poor binding of vitamin B12 to intrinsic factor in a hypochlorhydric environment, which makes it very challenging for us to absorb sufficient B12 further downstream in the ileum. When proteins are not being appropriately denatured, they look more antigenic, more likely to have immune system responses to it. Maldigested protein is more likely to be food fodder at the microbial buffet and contribute to dysbiosis. Huge number of dynamics that can be at play here. And again, we tend to focus on the almighty comprehensive stool test. And sure, I love comprehensive stool tests. I do find that they are overused. Too often we jump to this $400 or $500 test as being necessary because when people have GI distress. But a huge number of people have GI distress just because they have bad eating hygiene. Or maybe they just have food sensitivities, in which case you've run the wrong test. You have to develop skills, clinical capability of assessing when to choose one over another. When is motility the issue? And we need to change what's causing that dysmotility. Is it poor serotonin function? Maybe because of years of SSRI medication use. Or is it subclinical hypothyroid function that no practitioner has found yet for this particular patient because they've never run a truly full thyroid panel or looked at it from a functional interpretive viewpoint? Maybe people have gastrointestinal distress simply because they have histamine overload in the gut, in which case an expensive stool test is not going to tell you anything useful at all. What they're experiencing is oxidative wear and tear on the brush border, and they're not making enough diamine oxidase in order to handle the histamine load from the microbiome and from their food. And they need a completely different set of interventions. This is all about your ability to pull together the puzzle pieces and confidently tease out for each unique person what's at play for them so that we test where appropriate. But we don't overtest. We don't inappropriately test, because the $435 from the comprehensive stool test would buy an awful lot of healthy food. It would buy an awful lot of really well-targeted supplements to help someone address what's actually happening in their body temporarily to begin to peel the onion of disease dynamics. But we need to get skilled at assessing and looking for hypochlorhydria. And as I said before, I want to talk for a moment about acid reflux, because one of the most common reasons people have hypochlorhydria is because it's the purposeful effect of an acid suppressing medication. But acid suppressing drugs are reducing the acidity, right? They're increasing the pH of digestive juices. People still have reflux. It's just that the gastric juices are not as acidic. And when they burble up past the lower esophageal sphincter into the lower part of the esophagus, they're not as acidic, and the gastric juices will be just alkaline enough to not optimally activate pepsin, which is a protein digesting enzyme. So it doesn't start basically digesting your esophagus. And so you get relief, but that's not addressing any root cause whatsoever. And there are common contributors to acid reflux. As I said earlier, a lot of acid reflux is just bad eating hygiene. Going beyond that, insufficient magnesium. We know that inadequate levels of magnesium or potassium or calcium can cause muscle spasming, tightness, and tension. Magnesium is by far the most common culprit for that because as more of a master electrolyte, it directly influences intracellular potassium uptake that allows the tissue to have optimal contraction and relaxation, stimulus and response. Food sensitivities is something else that can cause that spasming, and hypochlorhydria can cause acid reflux. And then someone takes a proton pump inhibitor medication on top of that, creating even lower stomach acid. And so there can be a vicious cycle here, but we've got to get at the roots. So often we teach a lot around deprescribing of medications, which can be a real challenge for practitioners because so often people come with this basket of medications that you did not prescribe, but on your watch, they are there. And you can see how the medications are precipitating overt secondary and tertiary disease dynamics. And so often an acid suppressing drug is the most important place to begin in deprescribing so that downstream digestion, protein denaturization, antimicrobial action. Stomach acid has so many important roles. And by addressing the GERD so that the acid suppressing drug is no longer necessary, we begin to peel the onion of disease so that their progress is sustainable. But there's a few things here in order to focus on, but so often what can be at the root of hypochlorhydria, if it's not these medications, is an H. pylori overgrowth. H. pylori is a commensal, I'm going to go back up to this page. H. pylori is a commensal bacteria. By the time we're adults, the vast majority of us have it. It is not a novel pathogen. There's actually good evidence showing it's a wonderful immune primer, an immune system priming strain, just like Candida albicans. And that if you completely wipe out the H. pylori, our immune system can potentially lose its priming ability to effectively keep other opportunistic species or parasites, for example, under control. We want to have some H. pylori. We just don't want it to overgrow. But one of the primary reasons it does overgrow is because stomach acid has been allowed to get too low. Or because I said earlier, there are terrain associated issues. For H. pylori, there's dysmotility, there's bad eating hygiene, right? There's immunosuppression because of stress, or maybe because of inadequate zinc. Not as common right now in the state we are with the pandemic because so many people took supplemental zinc. Actually, so many people have been taking supplemental zinc that they created downstream copper insufficiency. Please be on the lookout for that. Both of those important for immune function. Used to be, there was a lot more copper dominance. Now I think we've got a lot of people taking way too much zinc without supporting other minerals, especially copper. So please be on the lookout for that. But let's talk for a minute about H. pylori, because an awful lot of practitioners make some missteps around H. pylori. As I said earlier, it's not a novel pathogen. You're not trying to wipe it out so there's no noticeable H. pylori in their body. I think that's a mistake. However, H. pylori can certainly get a toehold, and the question comes up of how long do I treat it? Well, it certainly varies by individual, and we want to pay attention to the downstream effects of what is happening in their body, but typically 4 to 6 weeks. Too often, H. pylori is being treated month after month after month with antimicrobials, and of course, those aren't just having an isolated effect in the gastric cavity. They are creating imbalance downstream in the intestines, so we want to be cautious about taking too much. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big fan, for example, in treating H. pylori, of using a combination of priming immune function. You can do a really good job of that with probiotics, for example, like with Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a beneficial yeast, which helps to prime immune function and can boost secretory IgA. And then there are a number of different antimicrobials that have been shown to be effective against the H. pylori. Believe it or not, one of the most effective is broccoli sprouts. And that is something that can be done as a food. I always recommend doing a combination of antimicrobials, though, because you don't know how vulnerable a given strain of a certain microbe and a unique person's body is going to be to a certain agent. So I like always using multifactorial antimicrobials. And being able to use things such as zinc carnosine and mastic gum and broccoli sprouts, right? For a combination type of treatment. Uva ursi is also very effective against H. pylori. And being able to use it effectively. Again, you're not trying to wipe it out. You're just trying to beat back the overgrowth. But while you're doing the antimicrobials, you must work on the terrain. And that includes motility. It includes eating hygiene. It includes thyroid function, serotonin function, pancreatic function. But you also must remember to think about stomach acid as being part of the terrain in the body. And if your gastric juices are not acidic enough, that actually promotes H. pylori overgrowth. And yes, it is true that there's a caution around supporting stomach acid with hydrochloric betaine with pepsin if you suspect an H. pylori infection. But I find many practitioners go way overboard on that concept. I'm not going to touch stomach acid until I run a stool test to see if there's H. pylori. So that's a serious problem. First of all, you could be waiting weeks and weeks or months in order to get data back. That's an incredibly expensive way to get an answer on whether or not a person has H. pylori. And if there are plenty of other signs and symptoms of hypochlorhydria or of H. pylori, we have to consider that there's a little bit of a chicken and egg dynamic here. If a person is struggling with a lot of belching during meals or soon after meals, or early satiety while eating, or upper GI bloating or distension or tightness or cramping, doing a trial with increasing stomach acid is very appropriate. And it doesn't mean if you act on the stomach acid first before the H. pylori becomes clear, that's fine. It's not a problem. One of the best things you can do is, I think of it as a bit of a Trojan horse type of strategy. You simply create a very alkaline environment in the stomach right before you use an antimicrobial, because you only need about 10 to 15 minutes for an alkaline environment in the gastric cavity to draw the H. pylori out into the lumen of the gastric cavity. And you can put just a little bit of baking soda, like a quarter teaspoon, in a quarter cup, half a cup of water. Have people drink that on an empty stomach in between meals. Wait 10 or 15 minutes, take your antimicrobial. You're creating an immediate local alkaline environment separate from meals, which will draw the H. pylori out, allow your antimicrobial to be very effective. And it's not keeping you from appropriately supporting stomach acid during meals in order to be working on the terrain simultaneously and improving the digestion of nutrients that might be needed to help sustain H. pylori balance, like zinc, or vitamin D or vitamin A. And we need appropriate pH also to activate digestive enzymes and bile. So don't get caught up in the, I have to ignore stomach acid until I'm sure around H. pylori. I think that's a recipe for a frustrated patient not having the right confidence in you and maybe giving up on their ability to get better. This is where you've got to develop the skills of how do I interlace clinical interventions for one particular person. Now, let's say the H pylori was something you knew of right away. Let's say the person has recurrent gastritis. Okay. I think you can assume H. pylori overgrowth. You will always support the mucosal integrity of the gastric cavity first with mucilaginous herbs. I recommend for at least 2 weeks. If they've been using acid suppressing drugs, make it 3 weeks. Nurture the mucosa first. And then let's say you start the antimicrobials. Just wait 2 weeks once you've started the antimicrobials, and then begin using the HCl support. So, we come at these awarenesses in different orders. There's not a perfect order of interventions, right? We have to get out from under the stranglehold of perfectionism in functional medicine, because it keeps a lot of practitioners on the sidelines wondering if they know enough or if they're capable enough, which is a real problem because we all know way more than enough to do this work. So I hope that's helpful in the world of H. pylori. I want to shift over and talk though about acid reflux, because it's not just a matter of saving the esophagus. And yes, we need to do that because certainly we know that failure to do so can increase the risk of all sorts of things, right? Barrett's esophagus, Schatzki's rings, all sorts of other esophageal disease. Eosinophilic esophagitis, right? GERD increases the risk of that, for example. But there are also many other disease dynamics downstream that can be promoted as a result of acid reflux and hypochlorhydria. And this is not even just in the widespread arena of inadequate nutrition, but actually with regard to the promotion of allergic hypersensitivity. And when we don't appropriately denature proteins, of course, they look more antigenic. Of course, our hypervigilant immune system is going to be more likely to respond to something that it should be tolerating. And so you definitely want to think about looking upstream at even in the case of immune disease or respiratory disease, where might the roots of that actually be in the gut? So we're talking about some of these other arenas where we need to focus more. I also want to talk about scum. I want to talk about the biofilm. Because this is a world in the gut. It's a community. It's population centers in the gut. Somehow we have this sort of broken view sometimes that the lumen of the intestines is just this crazy dense packed world of very active free microbes. And that's not realistic at all. What we have is this incredible biofilm that is it's a polymer matrix that is an intentional living community, if you will, across microbes that agree to work commensally together and have incredible abilities across strains for quorum sensing to allow for symbiotic living. And this is a good reminder, by the way, that the vast majority of our microbiome is happily being housed in a biofilm, and it is not wanting to come out and be in our stool for the convenience of being measured in a stool test. And so in this way, a stool test at best is just gently representative of what's happening in the gut. Now, this makes normal values and ranges in stool samples a very important consideration, but be cautious to extrapolate that what's happening in the stool is what's happening in the small intestines. That's not true at all. We also need to think about the biofilm being an essential part of the terrain. You have to feed your microbes. The microbes need to make short chain fatty acids, not only to nourish our enterocytes there locally, but short chain fatty acids are metabolic regulators in the systemic body. Dysregulated balances of short chain fatty acids is a well acknowledged dynamic in metabolic disease, in fatty liver, in type 2 diabetes. We know that there are certain strains that are what I like to call mucolytic specialists. Akkermansia muciniphila is experiencing its celebrity introduction in the functional medicine world. And we can have issues if there's either too little of it or too much of it in the gut. But suffice it to say, the question comes up all of the time. Should I use a biofilm buster? Like as a matter of course, every time you want to run a stool test or every time you want to use an antimicrobial? Well, you could, but you're going to decimate commensal bacteria. And so if you're chasing a truly virulent pathogen, then maybe it's worth it. In the vast majority of cases, it's not, because your own commensal bacteria will actively suppress an opportunistic overgrowth of something that we don't have the antimicrobials to affect. So again, thinking about sometimes the best defense is a really good offense. And how do you boost other commensals, their diversity and their numbers, and use prebiotics in order to fuel them? But I think all practitioners need to have a rich understanding of the mucosal layer and the distinction between them in the small intestines and the large intestines, and what we can best do in order to support it, depending on what kind of disease dynamics people are presenting with. But this is a critical part of intestinal health. We talk a lot about enhanced intestinal permeability, but a key aspect of allowing that to happen is the degrading of the mucosa. Well, what are we doing that's degrading that mucosa? Well, unfortunately, we're doing a lot of things that are degrading that mucosa, both on purpose sometimes as well as inappropriately. But let me pull together some concepts here. And I know I have to reel it in, Jody, because I could just keep talking for hours. But let's just take a common disease dynamic, IBS, right? We all know what it looks like. We know the digestive criteria. These are downstream outcomes, right? Functional medicine teaches us that we can treat the disease, sure, sometimes very appropriate if it's highly debilitating or if other body parts are suffering. But that's not enough. We have to go upstream and question, what are the disease dynamics at play in a unique individual? In the case of IBS, the four octagons there, right? These are the most common ones that are involved. Not everyone who has IBS has all four. Some just have one, some have two, some have three, right? We have to get really confident and capable at assessing unique individuals and nailing it, and not feeling dependent on a comprehensive stool test to be able to do that. But then things really start to get interesting when we go upstream from those disease dynamics and actually ask, right, what are the functional imbalances that are at play? And how do we address those sustainably? But even that is not enough. These are not all of them for sure, but these are some of the common contributors to the disease dynamics, but you got to go upstream. Outside of the gut, what are the systemic functional imbalances, right? Some of these are caused by lifestyle choices, right? Medications, other disease dynamics, right? But we've even got to go upstream for that in terms of lifestyle choices. Too many functional practitioners stop with the green boxes. I'm treating the gut. I'm focused on the gut like a microscope, as opposed to no, the gut affects everything else, but everything else affects the gut. We've got to develop the ability to carry out comprehensive application of functional medicine in your unique modality, right? If you stop at the light blue systemic boxes, then you're asking for recurrent disease dynamics. They will come back because we're not addressing the darker blue boxes. We're not addressing the terrain, the environment. And of course, we know socioculturally, crap food, toxins, and stress are at the root of the vast majority of complex disease cases. But comprehensive functional medicine application must necessarily include all of these. And it is a skill to be able to puzzle piece for a unique individual. It's why at SAFM we practice complex case after complex case of practice. You actually receive, even just in our standard curriculum, over 100 hours of complex case practice over and over and over again, and not with superficial, simple cases, but real life complex cases from mine or one of your colleagues' actual practices. And being able to see maybe the context of IBS through a whole bunch of different lenses, so that your learning goes way beyond a textbook, way beyond the latest and greatest sexy science, but actually puts you in the aha space of, oh my gosh, I'm so confident that whoever walks in the door, whatever their flavor or color of IBS is, I got you. I understand. I am confident and capable to be able to puzzle piece out what is at play for a unique individual. And then our students receive also lifelong learning and clinical case support on an ongoing basis to make sure they keep getting that while they are applying functional medicine in their practice. I'm a huge believer that super sexy, latest and greatest science is very interesting. I get it. I'm, geek's paradise, right? Always fun to learn novel science, but it's so not enough. Over half of our students at SAFM already have somebody else's certification in functional medicine, but they come to us because it wasn't enough. They're missing that devil in the detail for the nuanced clinical application of everything they learned. And they haven't had nearly enough case practice, not nearly enough experience actually applying the learning. And okay, I understand what's at play, but what do I do? Too many handy dandy charts running around where people memorize protocols. Protocols are great until they don't work. Protocols are great until a unique person can't use that protocol because they're allergic to that ingredient, or there's a medication that would interfere with this particular regimen. What do you do now? Talk about a recipe for overwhelm. I want all of you to be confident going, no problem. Maybe you have a protocol from a class. We certainly teach them, but then we teach people to confidently discard them. Because sure, it's a guide to reference. If you're thinking, what else could I do? You can go and look for ideas. You can look it up in our Q&A treasure chest and find some ideas from other case examples. But I want all of us to have the ability to customize set of interventions without relying on a handy dandy chart, which is one of the things that most makes people feel what I would call imposter syndrome. I've supposedly learned functional medicine and I call myself a functional medicine practitioner, but I don't feel nearly confident enough. I don't feel nearly capable enough. I refer out all of the really juicy, complex cases because I'm not sure I know what I'm doing yet. I want a higher level of fulfillment for you. I want a higher level of impact for you. So
yeah, to Tracy's point, I mean, I have to say, somebody's asking, what do you do if you can't figure things out? I mean, there's so many resources in the school that you can look things up. So you have a keyword like, I want to know more about acid reflux, and you just look it up, and there's over 1,000 posts in the clinical treasure chest that you can just have access to all this information on what to do and what to look out for and contraindications and all these things. Very, very deep level. And I will say, like Tracy said, there's the open coaching calls where one of your peers will present a case and you get to ask questions about it. There's her own cases. You can meet one-on-one with a teaching consultant and look through a patient case of yours and say, geez, I am so stuck. I need to sit down for an hour and go through this and get answers and get clarity. So, this is not a short toe dip program. And I know you're not here for advertisement for the program, but I just want to say, you will not leave this school without knowing and feeling tremendously confident in your ability to work and use functional medicine effectively in your practice. There's nothing out there that's better. And I owe the success of my practice to Tracy and the school. And if any of you are interested, I know enrollment is going on currently, and then we have a bunch of questions we want to go through, and I know you want to finish, but If you sign up now, it's you're going to save $1,000 by August 10th on the program, which is great. So Terry can put the link in below for that. There's an info session. We'll also put the link in for an info session, both from the graduates. You can ask a graduate a question, or you can hear Tracy outline the program as well. I also wanted to mention the practitioner forum. I know you mentioned that, but you can present a case right in the forum and ask questions about your own patient case of something going on. If you have a quick question, you're meeting with the patient tomorrow and you've got a quick question you got to know, you can, you can search keywords in the forum, but you can also, you just get such confidence and in being able to, really help anyone with anything. So anyway, commercial over.
Thank you, Jody. I appreciate all of that. That's great. So I could keep, it's our gut course is 9 hours long. I could keep talking about this for on and on and on, but enhanced intestinal permeability, right? Again, too often we think, oh, well, that's gluten or that's zonulin. Or that's not enough vitamin D. Sure, but it's also a whole bunch of other things. And so being able to cast a broader net and looking at where is what's happening in the gut, not staying in the gut because of increased permeability. And this is a huge issue in COVID because of the number of ACE2 receptors in the intestines. And therefore, the immune battleground it ends up creating that create oxidative wear and tear on the gut lining that not only creates nutrient malabsorption, but also increases permeability. We know that interleukin-6 is one of the hallmark cytokines at play in COVID disease. And that's one of the worst culprits with regard to creating systemic inflammation. And that can contribute to increased permeability in the blood-brain barrier, which we know is part of the driver for a lot of neurological and cognitive effects of COVID, especially with long COVID. But I'm not a fan of handy dandy charts because it oversimplifies an incredibly rich science. And as Jody well said, I appreciate the promotion, but we have to learn this science deeply enough to really be able to provide comprehensive care. And what we teach is very much like a master's degree in functional medicine. It's not a toe dip at all. There's nothing light and fluffy about it. No quick handy dandy 6-month program that gives you a lot of handy dandy charts. I'm not a fan because it conveys an inauthentic level of confidence. That is certainly fine in terms of just adding a few pearls here and there in a practice. I don't mean to be critical, but it's not getting people what they need to do the work because too many people get certified and are still on the sidelines of healthcare transformation. I don't want that for your patients. I don't want that for the state of the world's health. But I don't want that for you as a practitioner because there is nothing like the feeling of fulfillment and satisfaction to where you're on fire with capability in doing this work. It's amazing. The first time someone on your watch sustainably reverses their autoimmune disease and it just doesn't come back and no ongoing medications needed. It's incredibly empowering and satisfying. Even the easy to reverse things like type 2 diabetes and acid reflux, but asthma, multiple sclerosis. I mean, there's all sorts of things that step by step, peeling the layers of, we refer to it as like an onion, right? Where onions have to be peeled in layers and there's a logical order of operations and being able to customize that for each unique individual. But I wanted you to have a checklist to be able to think more about step-by-step with regard to enhanced intestinal permeability as well, because it is not universal, but it is often more common than many practitioners think. But if we want to address it, we got to address the root cause in a unique individual.
Tracy, thank you so much for this. I know you're going to talk about the workshop. I have to run because I have an appointment in just 4 minutes. So we'll wrap it up. But thank you all so much for attending and go ahead and tell us about the workshop.
Yeah, so I love to give stuff away. So we run advanced practice workshops, which are these awesome, fun virtual online workshops. It's not a lecture, it's a workshop. Everyone's interacting together and assessing cases and breakout groups and sharing pearls from their clinical practice. Super fun. You can earn 5 CMEs. You're welcome to click and learn more about it if you wish, but we're going to give away 5 free seats for our next one, which is on July 16th. And so people who register for today's session, or as Jody mentioned, who do so moving forward in order to get the slide deck, we'll do a drawing later this week. And, no catch, no pitch, just a free ticket. Folks interact from all over the world and all sorts of different modalities. It's crazy fun. So, but I just want to thank you for the opportunity, Jody, to just be of service. If there are follow-on questions, I'll certainly pay attention to the chat thread after today's session is posted. If there are follow-on questions for anything I discussed today, I'm so happy to answer them. So feel free to post those in the thread underneath the archive for the, video. I'm happy to do that.
Oh, thank you so much, Tracy.
But thank you very much. I appreciate it, Jody. That's great.
Very, very generous, and we appreciate it. So be sure to enter your chances of winning are high. So, and you can choose the date you want to use the workshop too. So if you're busy, you can pick another day for it. And Natalie's asking, she wishes her clients would stick with the program long enough to see results. And I think that's why we learn, Tracy's a big fan of teaching rapid relief in one area first. So it galvanizes their belief in feeling better and they stay with you long. And I have a very extremely low attrition rate. They stay with me longer. I feel like that's one of the reasons I'm so successful is, I met with someone 25 days ago and they're already feeling so much better and they can't wait to do the next thing to work with me. So anyway, thank you so much, Tracy. This has been amazing. If any of you want the replay, be sure to register for this and you'll get a copy of the replay, copy of the slides with all those links. So you'll have those studies. Tracy goes through hundreds of studies for each course. And these are really highly curated studies that are really worth learning and looking at. And
I was going to say, not me, our clinical education team,
okay.
Right?
Yes,
we got a lot of smart minds pulling all the coursework together for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you all. Take care, everybody. And have a great one, Tracy.
Thanks, Jody.
Thank you again,
everyone.
So grateful. Bye-bye.